fans adore him. Parents despise him.
And this next song is for every priest that said you were going to hell.
Marilyn Manson. The name alone evokes both beauty and terror.
Marilyn Manson is kind of looking at the general public and saying, look what you did. This is what you turned me into. I'm an American Frankenstein.
He wants to push people. He wants people to think and to feel uncomfortable and to feel offended. That's the whole point.
New Jersey saying they don't want Marilyn Manson to perform. Are you crazy?
I've been blamed for more school shootings than anyone in the history of entertainment, and I don't really know how to feel about that.
April 20th, 1999. The Denver suburb of Littleton, Colorado was shattered when teens Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold went on a killing spree at Columbine High School before turning their guns on themselves. A horrified nation watched the massacre play out on television.
The day of the Columbine murders, I was at home watching it on TV. Manson was on tour, and I was on the phone with him.
I was in Chicago in a hotel room with Twiggy, talking, drinking, you know.
And Manson said, oh, I'll probably get blamed for this, kind of half kidding.
It came on TV, and I remember the first thing it said was 3 gunmen dressed in Marilyn Manson costumes.
And from that point, it just snowballed.
Since the Colorado tragedy, there has been an outpouring of criticism against rock musician Marilyn Manson.
Critics believe there is a connection between Marilyn Manson and the tragedy in Littleton.
Marilyn Manson's music contains what some call a violent message, and what some say is partly to blame for the Columbine High School shooting.
These 2 kids were psychopaths. They just thought, let's go kill without any emotion. How do you blame that on Marilyn Manson?
It was as if I had done something, if I had pulled the trigger myself.
It was Marilyn's fault that they wore long black coats and they had black hair. I mean, come on.
Everything about my message is quite the opposite. I mean, everything I say is opposing the stupidity of violence and media's perpetuation to make violent offenders into folk heroes by putting them on the cover of Time magazine.
Manson was scheduled to appear just a week later in Denver, just miles from the site of the massacre.
And last night, demonstrators protested what could be Manson's last performance for a while.
Under pressure from city officials, the concert promoter canceled the show.
It was a bit much to handle, to turn on CNN and Fox News and hear about Marilyn Manson being accused of influencing kids to shoot up schools.
Being blamed for an atrocity took an emotional toll. Manson personally canceled the 5 remaining tour dates.
It really devastated him to the point where people really thought he was responsible for it.
It freaked me out too. If someone told me I'm the reason why a bunch of kids died.
When something like that happens, it's very hard to deal with, but that comes along with our territory, unfortunately.
He represented a threat to society, and Manson was an effigy during that time period.
Slowly, investigations shed light on the killer's backgrounds.
And here it turned out that they were actually not fans of Manson.
But even this revelation couldn't stop the torrent of criticism directed at him.
After Columbine happened, Manson went into a self-imposed exile. The media response and America's response was exactly the type of behavior that Manson had always indicted to begin with, and he refused to play a part in that.
When he finally returned to Colorado 2 years after Columbine, Manson reached out to some of the victims.
I met one of the survivors, the kid that's in the wheelchair that was shot in the back. Basically, I was really concerned about how he felt towards me if I held some sort of blame in his mind And he didn't really even have any blame towards the people who shot him.
But coming back to the very area where the Columbine killings occurred was a risky move.
I remember being at Mile High Stadium in Denver with numerous death threats.
He had 20 plainclothes police officers as his personal bodyguard that day.
I got calls from everyone in my family. My mother, scared most of all. Everyone told me, do not go on stage. Why would you do it? What do you have to prove?
It was scary seeing the laser pointers coming on stage at Manson, where you never knew if it was something off a real scope.
And I figured, if anyone wants to kill me, it's Mile High Stadium. I'm a sitting target, but I have to do it. If I'm willing to say that I live for my art, I have to be willing to die for it.
Manson would have the last word on the Columbine tragedy. In 2001, director Michael Moore interviewed him for a documentary on gun violence, asking what he would have said to the students at Columbine.
When he talked to Michael Moore, he shut everyone's mouth, and that was the best thing. He's like, you know what, I wouldn't have said anything to these kids. I would have sat down and listened.
Ironically, America's most notorious rock and roll anti-hero came from a town that celebrates all American heroes, Canton, Ohio, home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The future Antichrist superstar was born Brian Warner on January 5, 1969. His mother, Barbara, a former nurse, doted on her only child.
My mother was always very odd when I was growing up. She kept me very close to her.
I think she lived a lot through him, and so she was a little bit obsessive about him.
His mother used to beat the hell out of neighbors for even looking at him crossways.
But Barbara's fierce protection was rooted in the unusual health risk Brian faced as a result of his father Hugh Warner's tour of duty during the Vietnam War.
I was in the Air Commandos. I sprayed Agent Orange.
I've got all that Agent Orange in me, so I had to go to a lot of government testings when I was a kid.
So he was subjected to a lot of children that had deformities, and missing legs and arms, and so that was a little traumatic.
Obviously, it hasn't affected me whatsoever.
Whatever doesn't kill you is gonna leave a scar.
The test results found Brian suffered no damage from his father's exposure to the toxic chemical. The Warners put the stressful experience behind them. They focused on Brian's education, choosing a private Christian school with a reputation for academic excellence. Little did they know, this experience would turn him into a holy terror. Controversial rocker Marilyn Manson grew up as Brian Warner in the early 70s in small-town Ohio, where he attended Heritage Christian School.
It was a non-denominational private school. Excellent education.
But as he got older, he chafed against what he considered its oppressive environment.
He really liked it until the later years where they started trying to mold the children's minds to a certain form of religion, just scared the bejesus out of them. He was afraid he'd come home and find everybody dead, burnt, and gone to hell.
His first instinct was to rebel.
I was an early dealer in the vices. I sold candy because at Christian school candy was contraband. I started my own comic book. It had some off-color comments in it that I got in trouble for.
He wanted to push the envelope even then.
But the biggest taboo? Heavy metal rock music. The school saw it as a gateway to sex, drugs, and the occult, and urged students to stay away.
So in Heritage Christian School, I was introduced to heavy metal by being told not to listen to it. They would play records backwards, and they would say, whatever you do, don't listen to this.
But Brian was hooked.
He loved Kiss. He loved playing the drums back then. In fact, he had a Kiss drum set. One year we dressed up for Halloween. Brian did all our makeup. I was Paul Stanley. Hugh was Gene Simmons, and Brian was Peter Criss.
But none of the taboos discussed in school could prepare 12-year-old Brian for the discovery he and his cousin Chad made one day in their grandfather's basement.
He had a very dark collection of pornography. I accidentally knocked over this stack of black and white photos, and that's when I became familiar with animal husbandry and the shapes and the goings-abouts of what animals do.
I didn't realize at his age what it did to his psyche.
It redefined our heterosexuality, that's for sure.
That end of sexuality stimulated his brain and his mind to put him down that path that we all want to go and that we don't go.
As he matured, Brian found himself gravitating to another dark art, the world of horror fiction.
I wanted to be a writer. I was very fond of Stephen King and Clive Barker, just drawn to that.
When he started getting involved in a writing class, I really kind of started seeing some real talent start coming with the stories that he wrote.
While Brian tried his hand writing horror short stories in high school, Hugh, who managed a local carpet store, was frustrated with the town's economic downturn. He wanted to leave Ohio for a better life.
This area was completely depleted, and because of the growth in Florida, you go where the money is.
He postponed the move so Brian could finish school. Then the family left the Rust Belt for the booming Sun Belt. But the adjustment proved very difficult for Brian.
I graduated high school. I moved to a new place where I had no friends, and I was probably really on that borderline of could have became an artist or could have maybe become, you know, something like a serial killer.
As an outsider in a new town, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Brian was adrift. Like many teens, he turned to one of his driving passions, metal music.
All I had was this escape in this world of music.
He put that together with his love of writing. He began reporting for a regional entertainment magazine.
I lied my way to become a senior editor at this magazine called 25th Parallel.
He did bizarre stories about topless donut shop girls and transvestites and major stars when they came into town.
And then when he started really interviewing musicians and bands, I think he got the idea, well, I can do this.
For Brian, it was a revelation. He realized it was he who should be on stage.
I had a lot of writing that I had started to accumulate. And somehow, in the midst of trying to be a writer, I encouraged a club owner to have open mic poetry night, which I pioneered at this club.
He would go there and read his poetry, and you know, he started a cult in that respect.
People responded in a way that was different than they responded to the other people. I don't know if it was what I was saying or in the delivery, but that turned very quickly into starting a band.
But before he ever wrote a single song, he developed his persona.
My reason for choosing Marilyn Manson as a name to represent the way culture combines and ultimately creates folk heroes out of people who are either not famous for talent or famous for crimes.
So you've got this dichotomy of the good of Marilyn Monroe, very famous starlet, and then Charles Manson is one of the most evil guys in modern history, yet the media kind of puts them both on the same level.
It was really an indictment against a society that's doped up and dumbed down by the culture of television.
Something beautiful and something ugly is what Marilyn Manson's all about, and it really describes his personality.
The first time I said it, it was like saying abracadabra. It came out of my mouth in a way that it sounded like a magic word.
Brian Warner was no more.
When you say you're going into music, most people get pretty nervous. But his parents are one of the few that completely embraced the idea of it and supported him.
It's funny, my wife would say, his name's Manson. Call him Manson. You call him anything but Manson in public, she'd rip your face off.
Brian met musicians who were also devoted to a new wave of harder, more alternative metal music. In 1989, they joined forces and soon after debuted on the local club scene.
I booked the first show for Marilyn Manson as my own manager without ever even having a song written. So at first, I think it was almost a social experiment.
The show was really unique in that the curtain was plastic taped together, and then The reveal was Manson. It was a full spectacle.
The band called itself Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids.
Marilyn Manson was based on theatrics and art from the beginning.
I remember that he had the mannequin heads out there.
I think there was a naked girl ironing a swastika flag. There was people in cages.
His father used to come to the shows with a priest's collar on.
They had a show before they had songs. It was just like this art explosion on stage of just chaos and expression.
A buzz began to grow about this outrageous alternative metal band. They became the darlings of the local club scene.
In the early 90s in Florida, there was a music scene. There was a lot of places to play, everywhere from Miami all the way up to, Atlanta.
I was just really shocked to see that he had this many fans already.
He would do these newsletters and handwrite the envelopes out, but I'm saying hundreds, if not thousands, names.
In just 5 years, he transformed himself from a stranger in a new town to the hottest act on the Florida club scene. Hot enough for one of alternative rock's reigning stars to take Manson to the national stage. As a shock rocker for a new generation, Marilyn Manson reached the top 40 pop charts in 1995 with his dark remake of the Eurythmics hit Sweet Dreams. While touring with Korn, Manson developed his next creation, a concept album about a character long on his mind, a weak, helpless boy who transforms into a superior being. His name, Antichrist Superstar.
I went in the back of the bus. I was playing guitar back there, and I started playing a song from Jesus Christ Superstar. He's like, "What do you know about Jesus Christ Superstar?" He was freaked out, because he already had the whole concept of the Antichrist Superstar going on in his head.
He has just everything, all the notebooks that he's ever had since a kid. And you'll see an original notebook with Antichrist Superstar written in it from when he was in 11th grade.
Manson and the band went to record the new album, Antichrist Superstar, at Trent Reznor's recording studio in New Orleans, a process that proved more grueling than they could possibly have anticipated.
And it was chaotic because while Trent is capable of being a good producer, I think he was not capable of being as good of a producer as he could have been because he was working on his own record at the time.
Manson kind of envisioned the album to be almost like a dark pop album, but Trent wanted to flex his abilities as an experimental producer.
It was a very weird experience. Alliances were made, and friendships were made, and enemies were made between all the people making the record. And Manson and I stuck together through all of it.
I think that there was a lot of drugs and a lot of anger and confusion, and it was New Orleans. It was always hot. It was terrible.
Manson fought with Reznor to keep his vision intact, but their mentor and protege relationship would be damaged beyond repair.
It just led to really dark times, and I think maybe that's what had to happen to have the record take place, and I don't regret anything.
It's probably my proudest moment. It's definitely one of my favorite records. That was just a really honest expression of what was going on in that period of our life. I'm glad that it happened that way because it definitely produced a great album.
Upon its release in 1997, the album rocketed into the charts.
When Manson found out that Antichrist Superstar was #3 on Billboard first week it came out, I think it was really kind of, for him, it's a validation of what he'd felt making that record.
With a title like Antichrist Superstar, Manson got the public outcry he seemed to want as much as album sales.
For all extents and purposes, he was Satan incarnate to America. You know, he had no other identity. He was just this evil